Afternoon, everyone. I can see people joining now, which is great. I'll just wait another minute just to make sure everyone's got into the webinar okay, and then we'll make a start on today's Going Green, Future-Proofing Your Website webinar. Hope everyone's had a lovely day so far. We're up in Leeds and it's nice and sunny, which is the first time for a few days, which is always good news, always good news. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about future-proofing your website and how we can make websites more sustainable. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, I'll do a quick intro about Made by Studio and who we are. So I'm Sam Taylor, I'm a creative director here at Made by Studio, and I'll be joined with Matt Wheeler, who will be talking very soon. And some people may have already attended the accessibility webinar we did earlier this week, and we'll mention that again throughout the presentation. But we had some really good Q&A at the end of that. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A as we go along. Perfect. So let's get started. So at Made by Studio, we care a lot about high-performing, responsible websites. That's our craft, and that's what we really love creating. We pride ourselves on our commitment to technical excellence, building digital solutions with sustainability and accessibility ingrained at every step of the process. So here's a few of our clients that we work with. We primarily focus on the green tech and med tech sectors. They're sectors that we have a great value alignment with. However, we do work with clients across the board, depending on the type of project they're looking for. So we've worked with the world's biggest construction company, right down to local mental health charities. We love what we do. It keeps it fresh. If there's a project that we think we can help on and is very people-led and can help people, the planet, become better in some way, then we're more than happy to have a look at it. So there's a very brief introduction about who we are. Now let's have a think about the direction the world's going and sustainability as a whole. So the aviation industry accounts for 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We all know aviation is a big cause of greenhouse gas emissions, and we think of this as a pretty big stat. And this is one that you might not be as familiar with. Internet use accounts for 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's almost double of what aviation is, but we look at aviation as this terrible sector, whereas if we just look at the internet alone, it's causing more harm. So our verdict on that, it's time for the web to become more sustainable. So what we're going to do today is look at our 10 principles of sustainable web design. We'll look at a few case studies along the way. We'll also provide some useful tools to help you on your journey as well. So I will be starting. I'll be looking at green UI and UX design before I hand over to Matt, who will look more into development. So number one, we want to incorporate JEDI design practices at every step of the way. So what does JEDI mean? It's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So while we have a focus on environmentally sustainable websites, this ties heavily into social sustainability and accessibility as well. So we tend to look at social sustainability because the more we can include people and not get people lost along the way, the better it is for sustainability as a whole. So we want to center the voices of marginalized users. So if we think about users that might not understand how a website works, if that's an accessibility problem, which we talked about earlier in the week, but we can send the slides out. If somebody is struggling with accessibility, they go on the website, they try to go through a customer journey, it doesn't really work for them, they don't understand how to get to where they want to be, then it's wasting a lot of energy, it's wasting a lot of time, and in the end, people probably leave that website and then go and try and find another, which is terrible for sustainability because it means you're loading a number of websites before someone can actually get the information they want. One way we can do this is being aware of our own biases. So as designers, we love to build products that look nice, that work well for us, and that we can really get along with. But is that going to work for the end user? Is it going to work for the edge cases, the edges of the bell curve? How can we make sure this is a really inclusive experience that people can use easily without getting lost along the way? That also ties into the accessibility point. So make sure your products and services are accessible to people with disabilities. This means following accessibility guidelines and testing your products and services with a variety of users. Another thing we need to think about is language. And sometimes it comes under the umbrella of UI UX. You have to work with copywriters on this. But we want to make sure that language is inclusive and easy to understand throughout the process. If we use language that isn't suitable and, again, guides people off course or sends them down the wrong way, we're sending people to websites that they don't need to be on, and we're using data and energy that shouldn't be there in the first place. So the second point we've got is planning the journey. So reducing journey time and signposting progression through a website is a great way to reduce the impact of the website. A shorter, more concise user journey not only provides an increased return on investment, but also saves energy. So here's a list of some of the things you can think about. The clarity of content, always very important. If you can make it clear and easy to read, then it's much more likely that that user will understand where they need to go. Usage of white space. So this is a pretty hot topic, actually, and have a quick think about what that could mean. So white space, as designers, we love it. It makes things more clear. As you can see on this design on the left, which is one that we're working on at the minute, it's a very open space and it guides the user's eyes right into the middle. So if we look around this kind of diagram shape, people instantly lock eyes with the title and then the very bright call to action button. And that's due to all the white space around it. There is the argument on the flip side that white space and using a lot of white within your designs is actually worse for energy consumption because it requires more energy to increase the brightness of the screen. And full transparency, this is something that we are still working on, and it's like, where does that sit right? If we do a fully black website with white text on it, it will save energy. However, that is less accessible for people with reading difficulties or dyslexia because they find it harder to read with white text on a dark background. So there's a lot of trade-offs we have to think about, and the perfect solution doesn't exist. It's going to be impossible to get a perfect solution. So we need to think about our user base and what may be more important to them, speak to our clients and stakeholders, what the trade-offs they think is acceptable. But at the end of the day, it's us as designers that need to make those decisions and put them in front of those stakeholders. So you can start thinking about how white space could be useful, or if it's dark space instead, if we want to then save energy. There's a lot of things to consider there. Primary call to actions, very important. We want to make sure we're signposting the way through this website as easily as possible. So if we look at the design on the left again, we've got get started with cloud today. Nice bright orange banner. If somebody's ready to convert that sale, they can easily see where they want to go. They're not having to scroll up and down the website, load different pages, try and find the contact page, because this all eats into your data. Potential distractions, another one. If we look at this design as a bit of a case study again, we've got these integrations floating around in this kind of diagram. So we've made those very small. We've not made them links because if, say, Rightmove's on there at the minute, if someone clicks on Rightmove, then they end up looking at properties for 20 minutes when they're not even bothered about buying a house, they're just being nosy, which we all do. But then we've spent 20 minutes using energy, very image heavy, so it's very easy to send people down a distracted route. But the more we can minimize that, the more energy we could save. Next point is amount of clicks to goal. Again, we spoke about this before, the better we can make a user journey and reduce the clicks, the more likely it is to have a return on investment and convert that sale. But it's also great for sustainable reasons. Again, if we can reduce the amount of pages that are loaded, we can reduce the impact of the website. User accessibility features. Again, we want to make sure websites are accessible. If somebody is on a mobile device, on a train, can it load quickly on pretty slow internet speeds? Otherwise, they're going to be refreshing the page over and over, loading it again and again. So again, if we can make these small considerations during the design, it should help developers later on in the process, which I know Matt's going to talk about. And deceptive design patterns. So we want to make sure it's an easy pattern throughout the website. Once we've used one component, it's likely we can use it again. The more we can repeat them, the more the user understands how to navigate through this website. Humans, we love repetition, we love patterns. So if we design every single component to look completely different, people would get lost, they wouldn't know how to go to the next page, and they'd end up spending more time searching around the website. So key points there, make sure you identify the user's goals, map out the steps required to achieve that goal, eliminate any unnecessary steps, make it easy for users to navigate, and test your user journeys with real users. So coming on to point number 3, keep it lightweight. So you've heard of the saying, less is more. Not only does this improve your website efficiency, but it's a common UI UX best practice. So again, if we look at 2 of the case studies we've got to the left here, the top one is a user journey we designed. And again, eliminating as many distractions as we can. On this one, the top navigation, we actually got rid of most of the top level pages, because once people are on that user journey, we want to, one, keep them there anyway to try and convert the sale, but we don't want them to get distracted looking at other pages if they think about something else or something comes up. At this point, we want them to answer a few really simple questions just to understand a little bit more about them, so we can offer them the best solution at the end of that journey. So a few things we can think about in this space: scalability. So how big is the platform? How many people are going to be using it? If you make a really complex page or complex user journey and it's getting loads of traffic, then it's going to be really bad for the environment. And that environmental impact is just going to be exponential as a business grows. Accessibility, again, I keep mentioning that, but it's such an important thing to think about when we're discussing sustainability. Performance, like I said before, if someone's got a poor connection or slow internet speeds and they're refreshing their page over and over and they're having to load these elements again and again, it's going to be terrible for performance. It'll make the website look bad. So if we can really strip back, keep it lightweight, boost that performance even more, which again impacts sustainability in a positive way. Information clarity. People, you just need to show people what they need to know at that time. So for example, this choose charger at the top, we're asking if you've got private or street parking, with 2 simple icons to illustrate what they are. We don't need any other information at that point, and the next step in the journey is another quick question. Super simple, it's clear what we're after and how to get to the next step. Website efficiency, so similar to performance, how can we make sure that user understands that they need to go through these questions to get to the next step? Again, on this top example, you might be able to see it's quite small, but we've got that green bar just underneath the header section of the website. So that green bar fills in as the user goes through this journey. It signposts exactly where they are. They know how much longer they can expect to be on this journey, but it allows it to be more efficient because they know how long each phase is going to take. So it's not like it's going to take them 20 minutes and they'll jump off, do it another time, come back onto the website, load it again, and it might take 3 or 4 times. They know it's a pretty quick journey. So again, that boosts website efficiency. And finally, design consistency, making sure we're doing component-driven design, which I'll talk about in a second. But the more consistent we can make a design, even with things like colors, fonts, the better impact your website will have on the environment. So similar to the last point, point number 4 is about reducing, optimizing, and removing heavy assets. So in this, we're looking at images, videos, and fonts. They are often the heaviest elements on a website. But when we look at them, are they providing real value to your users? So 3 things to consider when we're designing websites is reducing elements, optimizing elements, or even removing them. So if we quickly touch on images, then first thing we want to do is check if they're correctly sized. If it's a tiny image on a website, we don't want to blow it up to 5,000 pixels and then upload it as an 18 meg file, which we've seen recently. We want to make sure it's sized down to the correct size. And following that, we want to make sure it's safe for web, it's optimized. Is it the correct file format? Have you checked if it's a PNG or a JPEG when you upload it? And then even further past that, could we then serve the images in a next-gen format? I know that's something that Matt will talk about later on, but that's something that you can discuss with your development team and make sure they're playing their part as well within image optimization. Next is video, very similar. Make sure it's correctly sized. Don't put a huge 4K video on a website that it's just showing a tiny little thumbnail in the corner. Is it correctly optimized? Can we make sure that it's a smaller file size as possible so we're not having huge loading elements on the page? And video, are they necessary? A lot of companies feel like they have to do video because TikTok, social media, you need it on the website. But is it really conveying a message, and are people going to expect to see video on your website? One huge thing is autoplay. If the video is auto-playing, you've not even given the user a chance to say whether they're bothered about it or not. If a user's not bothered about it and you're loading a 300 meg video, that's terrible for consumption in a sustainability way. So make sure you carefully consider if it should autoplay or not. Finally, are they embedded? Are they directly on the website, pulling from your own server every time? Or is it coming from a place like YouTube? Again, there's a lot of trade-offs with that. YouTube can often be quite heavy in terms of all the analytics it pulls through, but it's worth considering if it's based on your own servers and if that's going to be heavy load speeds or not. Finally, fonts. So fonts are actually pretty heavy assets, and sometimes you wouldn't think so, but can we reduce the number of fonts we're using on a page? Can we try and limit it? I'd say that's probably good design practice anyway, not to have more than 2, possibly 3 fonts on your brand, on your website. But can we make sure we're not loading hundreds of different font files? So the answer to this and alternatives, we can look at SVG and vector formats. So in this example we've got here, we've got a few icons. Again, they look quite small, but we've got icons above each one of the features. Each one of those icons is an SVG, so that's a scalable vector graphic. So instead of using a raster image like a JPEG or PNG, we're making sure we're using an SVG, which is actually code. On the back of that, if we have animations, so not proper video, but animated elements or motion graphics, could we look at using a Lottie animation? So a Lottie animation uses vector, but in a video format. So I think it was created by Airbnb, and when you export a Lottie from, say, After Effects, you can then upload that code into your website. So again, it's not putting really heavy media files onto your website, it's actually using code. So always ask yourself, is it really helping the user? And is it 100% necessary? If the answer is no to them, just get rid of it anyway. If it's not going to serve those and we're just doing it because it looks a bit cool in design, but it's not actually going to help, sack it off. So point number 5, and the last one from me, is using a concise design system. So using a design system is really, really helpful because it streamlines the processes between different designers and developments, which in the end provides a more sustainable product. And the reason on that is it saves loads of time within design and development anyway. This is something that we've been trying to work on over the past 2 years. Again, for transparency, we're constantly updating our own. We've started building them out for different clients now. But once you have that design system in place, it saves all the emails going backward and forward asking, have you got this font? Have you got that font? Have you got this color? What is the hex code here? And it saves designers trying to actually pick all the different colors, pick the right size fonts, because you have a single source of truth that imports into all your projects and allows you just to pull from that library. So it saves huge amounts of energy in actual design and development time before your website's even launched. Another thing it does is make components reusable. As I've already said, components are very important in making sure design's consistent. So if we can make those reusable and standard throughout, then you're going to get a better time at the end. Finally, I've already mentioned standardizing colors and fonts. If we can standardize those across the board, we're not loading different colors and fonts into a final product. Once a product is launched, we know it's already standardized, so we're not going to have a lot of the problems I've already mentioned. So overall, this will increase UI consistency across teams, reduce development times, reduce bugs as well. Bugs is a huge point, which I know Matt will talk about, but the more we can reduce those, the more energy that we're saving in the long run. And it also increases our focus on high-level concerns. So we can care more about other things in regards to creating a more sustainable product, rather than worrying about the little colors and fonts and all things like that should just be sorted in the first place. So that's all from me on design side. I now hand over to Matt to blow your minds on sustainable development. That was a big intro.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Wheeler. I'm the digital director of madeby.studio, and Sam's just going over some really good points in terms of like sustainable design, but I'm going to be going over 5 more additional points in terms of sustainable development and the infrastructure around that. So we go into the first one. This is probably a bit of an obvious one, but it's quite often that I don't see companies still using green web hosting, and this is the easiest way to have a big impact on the sustainability of your website. So for example, if we're considering web hosts like Amazon Web Services, they aren't currently running off renewable energy. I think it's something like 80–90% of their data centers are. So there is a portion of them in particular regions which aren't running off sustainable sources. And if you consider kind of the impact that those data centers produce, so if we refer back to the stat that Sam mentioned at the beginning, that 4% of the web is actually adding to the greenhouse emissions and whatnot. If we shift all the websites that we're hosting across to renewable energy powered data centers, we're going to be drastically reducing that. And there are data centers already out there which are running off 100% renewable energy. And I've listed a few here. So there's DigitalOcean London Region 1 is actually renewable energy, although they're not exactly very transparent around kind of the sustainability impact of all their data centers. Whereas there is other companies such as Positive Internet down in London. They have their own kind of custom built data center, which is guaranteed running off 100% renewable energy sources. And then we've got We Are Ha, or HA, sorry, which I think they're based up north, and I can confirm that they run off 100% renewable energy hosting as well. So that is one of the biggest impacts you can do in terms of like the infrastructure around it. But if you wanted to look around kind of like all the green energy hosts across the world, there is a website called Green Web Foundation, which has this full list. And to become a part of that Green Web Foundation, you have to kind of prove that the data centers that you're using are 100% renewable sources. And that's just a really good resource. And that's what we use to find any data centers that we want to know that is using Green Web hosting. And the second point in terms of development is this ties very closely into design systems. So Sam's mentioned before that when you're using this design system, rather than using kind of this sporadic components where you have loads and loads of different variations, you streamline it down to just a very small select amount of components. And this works in the same way for development. If you reduce the amount of components that you have, for a developer to build, for one, that is faster to build, so you'll get a better product overall. But in terms of kind of the website delivery and the website loading, it's going to be more efficient, because rather than coding kind of 20 or 30 bits of code for these various different components, it's only going to load in like 6 or 7 with these kind of consistency throughout. So once it's loaded once, it won't really have to load it again, because what a website can do is store it in the cache and just load it from that person's local device anyway. And again, that's going to be reducing that carbon impact as well. And in terms of kind of just web development best practices, that's something that every developer should be doing anyway, because if you're looking at it in terms of kind of a business case, when you are following this kind of component-driven design and component-driven development, you're going to have a more scalable product. It's going to be naturally increased performance, and you're going to provide a better user experience as a whole. And that is what provides that consistency to your users. And the final point on this one is taking advantage of code splitting. So what I mentioned before is that if you are loading in kind of there's various different components, if you are like building a website and you only wanted to select a few of these components on particular pages and you didn't want to load the whole library, what you can do is an optimization technique called code splitting. You only load in that particular component for that particular page, and it prevents you having to load in like all the website's code, all the website's CSS or JavaScript on every single page. You only load in exactly what you need, and that reduces the amount of resources you have to load per page load. And again, that's just going to help the sustainability of your website, as well as increasing the performance overall. So the next point in the development best practices for sustainability is reducing the page weight. So again, this comes into development best practices, but it ties very closely into sustainability. So the first one is you've got to minify your code. And this is something that you hear quite commonly in technical search engine optimization, as well as just kind of general website optimization. And what this does, it just reduces the code to just this minified file. So as developers, we tend to have quite long kind of code files where it's very easy to read to a human user, but if you minify it, it just compresses it all into this kind of just one big file, removes all the spaces, changes all the variables as short as possible, and that is just naturally decreasing the size of the files that needs to be loaded. The second one is restrict font weights. So for example, if you're using like a service like Google Fonts and you're loading in every single weight from like 100 to 900, you're actually loading in 900 different you're loading in 9 different font weights, and that each one of those has to be individually loaded on your website. Whereas if you download those and upload those to your server, so the user doesn't have to make a fetch request to Google every single page they load, they just need to make it once to your website, and you restrict the amount of font weights that you're using. So for example, if you just wanted to use a normal weight and a bold weight, that's all you would have on your website, and you would restrict it down to that, because fonts can be quite resource intensive. So if you just restrict it down, your users' browsers can, or your users' devices can cache that. And again, they won't have to be making a regular request to the server. And again, that's just going to reduce that sustainable impact that you're having with your website. The next one is use inline scripts and styles. Again, this is just a common optimization technique. So you can bring all the code into just a HTML file. And this ties into the next one, which is using static site generation, which is what we use on every single website we deliver. So rather than having to kind of make a request to the server, and let's say you're using a language like PHP behind the scenes, and that has to generate the file, send it back, you can statically cache every single page on your website. And when you do that, rather than having to make a call directly to the server, you can just skip that completely, and you just fetch this HTML file, which is like as simple as you can get. That is the most optimized file format you can get to as well when you're delivering the website, because if it's statically generated, there's not really any server-side rendering. It's all kind of client-side, so it just makes it a lot more efficient. And again, you're going to be increasing that performance of your website. One that Sam's already touched on is optimizing the images and videos. So quite often you'll hear agencies say, make sure your images are optimized, resize them, reduce the file size, make sure they're kind of not huge, like 3-5 meg. That's something you shouldn't be having on your website at all. You should be aiming for about 150 kilobytes or less than that if you can, while maintaining that quality. But another thing to consider is, what I've heard quite often is everyone says, oh, your website should be using a file format called WebP if you're using kind of JPEGs and PNGs. Although there's been another recent trend where there's another file format which is even better performance than WebP, which is AVIF. So a lot of the content delivery networks are already delivering files to browsers that can already support that. So it's something that you always have to be checking, because development is always developing. There's always like innovative ideas coming out. So you just got to keep an eye on what is the latest tech and what is the best, latest optimization techniques you can use on your website. The next one is lazy load all your visual assets. So this is anything below the fold. So you don't want to be lazy loading like any images above the fold, because the user will be able to see that and it could affect the user experience. But anything below the fold, which is kind of, let's say you're on a mobile device and that's the bottom of the screen, it's anything below that the user can't see. And if you enable lazy load on the assets below that fold, what happens is, instead of loading absolutely everything as soon as that website's loaded, it'll load things in incrementally as that user scrolls down the page and as those assets come into view. And let's say a user never gets down to the bottom of the page, they'll never have to load the image at the bottom of the page either. So again, it's just increasing that sustainability of your website. The next one is, I've already touched on modern image and video formats previously, so that's the WebP and AVIF. And then another one is remove unnecessary code bloats. So quite often I see a lot of websites where we've been handed them from other kind of developers, where there's just kind of code that's not very well optimized, it's not very efficient, and there's opportunities there to do refactoring and just make it work better. So we should always be looking out for those as well, because not only does that affect the sustainability, but it also affects the performance of your website as well. If you're removing code bloat and you're making it more optimized, you can have a better performance. and loading times can be a lot faster, and again, affecting that sustainability. The next one is cache. So this ties into kind of what I mentioned about static caching. So every page on your website, every asset, absolutely everything should be cached where possible. So with the website pages, they can be cached as just static HTML. With assets such as images, videos, GIFs, and stuff like that, you can cache those server side. So if you're using a engine such as like Engine X on your web server, you can set kind of the caching time frames, so you can cache images like 30 days. So rather than having to kind of regenerate those images each time and fetch them each time, the server will just be delivering from the cache each time. And again, it's going to increase the performance of your website, and it's going to increase the sustainability of your website. And then the second one I've got on there is reducing the page weight. So again, that ties into everything I've said previously about reducing the code bloat, static cache, and minifying everything, compressing all files using the correct file format. So all these things come together as one. And that again reduces the sustainability, or increases the sustainability of your website, sorry. And then the final point I've got is that content really needed? So an interesting stat I found is that 90.6% of internet traffic, internet content gets absolutely no traffic from Google. So is that content really needed? If you've got a website with like 500 pages, is all that content on your website providing value? Google is now rewarding content that provides value. And if you've got kind of all your content spread across all these different pages, but only, let's say, 20% of that those pages are getting traffic, is that 80% actually really needed? You might be able to get rid of it. You might be able to just turn it into a resource hub and provide more value to your users. So you've got to be really aware of kind of the content you're producing. Are you just producing it for the sake of producing content, or is there actually true value behind it? And in terms of kind of like the search engine optimization as well, this works really well, because if you can condense everything down into kind of like 20 pages and it's really, really concise and it's really easy to find this content, Google's going to reward you, but you're also increasing the sustainable impact of your website as well, because users aren't having to navigate around kind of like loads and loads of different pages, because everything is going to be in this one central area. And if you really focus on that navigation, the experience, it's just going to make it so much easier for that user as a whole. So again, it just has a positive impact in kind of all cases when you're building on the web. So being sustainable doesn't actually sacrifice any results as well, because as you've probably noticed already, a lot of the best practices in terms of kind of design and development tie into sustainability. If you are following kind of what's recommended in these two areas, you're naturally going to be producing more sustainable solutions. And that's the key thing to know. There is a bit more kind of consideration if you're trying to get really, really sustainable websites. But again, like, you just got to follow those best practices. And if anyone joined our webinar on Monday about accessibility, we're going to go over the same case study as well, but we're going to go from a sustainable impact as well. So this is one of our clients, Diamedica. So they produce safe anesthetic and respiratory solutions to low and limited resource settings. So they tend to work in kind of sub-Saharan Africa, supplying these anesthetic machines. One of the key things of the brief was the website needs to be usable for users using kind of low internet connectivity or small devices. So for example, like slow 3G networks. So we built a solution which was really accessible, as well as like the sustainable impact, just to make sure that those pages were loading really, really fast. And by focusing on that kind of really fast loading times, it naturally created a sustainable website as well. And it's basically just like kind of a really, really good quality solution. And it's no sacrifice in terms of kind of like sustainability, no sacrifice in accessibility, but it still performs well and gets really good results. So in terms of kind of the sustainability of this website, we can see that 86% so it's cleaner than 86% of web pages that are tested, only producing 0.414 grams of CO2 every time someone visits this page, which is a really, really good quality and sustainable website page. And you can see that on the previous slide, you can see we've actually got some images in the header. And if you go on this website on the live one, you can see we've got images all the way through, animations as well. And that comes through kind of just optimizing, using the correct file formats, making sure everything's resized correctly. So you can still have a very good quality solution, a really good quality design and user experience, but maintaining sustainability. And we're going to go over what this tool is to check the sustainable impact of your website is in a sec. I just got 2 more slides to go through in terms of kind of results, and then we'll go through that as well. So in terms of kind of the Google Lighthouse audit, you can see it's getting kind of top marks across absolutely everything. If you don't know what Google Lighthouse is, it's Google's way of kind of just auditing your website across performance, best practices, accessibility, and SEO. It's kind of like the basics of what you should be doing if you are launching a website. You want to be hitting 90s above anything across here. Ideally, best practices, accessibility, and SEO. You can always hit hundreds as long as you're following those best practices that we've gone over throughout this whole talk. And you can see here that 3 months after the launch of this website, we saw a 50.8% increase in website inquiries in the first 3 months. So you can see again, there is no sacrifice on the results by focusing on the sustainability of building a website. So in terms of the tools that we're using to check the website carbon, there's a website called Website Carbon Calculator, which is probably one of the best out there. And all you need to do is drop your website page in there, and it'll run a full audit of the amount of CO2 that your website is producing per page visit. This is kind of like the go-to tool. So you wanted to start testing your website for the carbon it's producing, this is the place to go. If you wanted to get some more insights in terms of kind of sustainable web design, there's a website called Sustainable Web Design, and it goes through kind of all the tips and tricks. It goes through the current kind of trends in the industry, as well as like kind of how you can start auditing and how you can start kind of creating this mindset of focusing on the sustainable impact of your website. So again, that's just a really good resource to go through. And then in terms of the development side, the Green Web Foundation is a really good resource as well. They go into terms of kind of like the hosting side, they have sort of kind of resources and tips and tricks in design as well as development. And it's open source as well. So there's a lot of kind of submissions from different people and different individuals putting their recommendations in, because focusing on sustainable design and development is a fairly new thing. So it's always developing. So that's one of the best places to look just to see what's changing in the industry. And then the final one, I'm going to let Sam talk through as well. So just introduce Sam back.
Yes, cheers, Matt. So the final one is an event we're putting on here in Leeds. So this is the Green Tech Gathering, and we have been doing quite a lot of things recently. We went to Yorkshire Sustainability Week, which was really good, but we've noticed there's a little bit of a gap in terms of the green tech community in Leeds. So on the 2nd of November, it's down in Leeds Dock, a place called Ferns. It'd be great if anyone can come along, if you're in the green tech scene or on the surrounding areas, if you want to carry on that conversation of how we can improve sustainability in the West Yorkshire region, then make sure you check out Green Tech Gathering. When we send out an email follow-up from this event, there'll be a link on there if you want to reserve a spot. But I believe that's everything from us. So thank you very much for sticking around and listening to this webinar. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so let's dive into those. So first question is there a good free for commercial use resource of icons out there, perhaps also images and fonts? Yeah, there's a whole wealth of them out there. One that we tend to use a lot is called Noun Project, N-O-U-N Project. And I think you pay a certain, it's actually, no, it's not free. we pay a certain amount every year, but it's a really low cost and you get so many icons. And we don't tend to use too many free icon libraries thinking about it. I know there are some, but you normally have to credit the artist on there. So I think unpick is one. Storyset is a really good one. So that's illustrations. But again, I'm pretty sure that you have to reference where you found those images. But the Noun Project is a really good one. It's not free, but it's very low cost for what you get. In terms of images, so I know there is Unsplash, that's free for commercial use. Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S.com. That's another one for image use. So there are some out there. Feel free to get in touch with me after and drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I can send through a load of links if that'd be useful. So another one is sources for the stats that have been mentioned. I believe all the sources were included earlier on. If there weren't any sources on there, we'll make sure they're linked out, and we can drop those sources for the stats that have been mentioned within the follow-up. Good stuff. So I think that's all for the Q&A. We only got 2 questions. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop them in. So, does it matter what platform you build your website on? Yes, it does. I'll let Matt take this one, much more knowledgeable.
Yes, in terms of kind of the platform that you're building on, there is so many out there. There's like WordPress, there's Crafted, as mentioned. We use Statamic as our preference. It's always hard to gauge kind of the sustainable impact of that platform you're using, because if you're using a good caching solution as the end goal, so for example, like with WordPress, you can put a cache on there, and that will improve the sustainability of your website, because it's going to be bypassing the request to the server to generate our website each time. But again, like with Statamic, we use that as preference because, again, it's got really, really good quality caching solutions. And in terms of kind of the performance it's creating, it kind of blows WordPress out of the water. Like, it is really, really powerful, really good. But again, it's really hard to gauge that kind of sustainable impact, because we can test what we're doing on the caching side, but in terms of kind of like the server side, so let's say you're saving a post or you're saving an asset like that, that's really hard to measure in terms of kind of CMS side. But you just got to kind of focus on that kind of output it's producing. So if you're getting traffic in like the tens of thousands, if you have a low carbon output on your website per page request, you can be confident that you're doing enough in terms of producing a sustainable impact on your website. Now, there's another question that's come in saying, do light animation / hover states on the websites use a lot of energy? That's not a question that we've been asked before, actually. It's something we'd have to do more research into, but again, I think it would be dependent on how you're doing those. If you're using kind of very heavyweight JavaScript-based animations with a lot of code in them, that's naturally going to be using more resources because you've got more code to make that run. But if it's a very kind of basic CSS animation, so it's just a hover and like an underline or a hover and an icon moves up, I'd assume that that's using a lower amount of resource, because that is just kind of standard within your browser. So if you're using CSS libraries, which are kind of just set in stone with the web foundation and stuff like that, that's going to be loading directly from your browser rather than having to load in directly from like an external sheet that you're writing yourself. There's no more questions coming in. Cool. If you've got no more questions, we'll leave it at that. So if you wanted to kind of access the Eventbrite link to our Green Tech Gathering event, you can just scan either of these 2 QR codes there, and they're on there. If you wanted to look through our previous webinar as well on accessibility that we done Monday, again, just scan either of those QR codes and it'll take you straight there, and we have a full list of links. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for joining.